Vanessa.
Hi, Dom.
How exhausted are you?
Very. And a little undercaffeinated.
Vanessa and I just shared the litany of small mistakes we've committed in the past month.
One of these mistakes, including leaving a laptop in an airport, which is super fun. Super fun. 24 hours there.
And accordingly, we apologize for the delay. We try to publish fortnightly, but sometimes, well, life. But anyway, this is a fun one. We have today Nancy Rommelman, a fantastic journalist, whom we actually recorded for a change in person and not by Zoom.
She came to our house.
Our studio, you mean?
Yeah.
Nancy is an author and a reporter, journalist who's been writing for all the outlets, but recently, especially for Reason, where she's been really doing extraordinary work reporting on the riots in Portland, Oregon. Her coverage of what's been going on there isn't just more rich in detail and character and honesty than most else that's been written about it. It also gives a profound view into the experience and world of the protest addicts, I guess. People who have wrapped their day-to-day meaning with ideologically fervent, often shallow, but very much destructive political activism. In fact, it's a type of activism in which the destruction is the main point. So we talk about this. We obviously talk about our thoughts regarding the state of media. It's unsurprising, but to be fair, the failure of information and sense-making institutions is one of the main issues for certain things. And we finally got to talk about something that's been on my mind for a while, and I say it was only an opening salvo into the topic, but the question of beauty and beauty as a social force and a commodity. It's something that Nancy and I have discussed in one of our first, I think possibly the first time we've met, and it was wonderful to be able to have that conversation online and at least start it. I would definitely love to go further into it. And we also got to talk a little bit about Rami's new media company, which is Paloma Media.
It's with Matt Welch, right?
I think so. Matt Welch, who we had on. And their underlying principle is not dissimilar to certain things, I guess. Cover the shit you care about and nothing else. And if you want to see what Paloma Media cares about, go and follow them immediately. And really, it's just a reminder that every once in a while, the internet is an awesome thing.
Yes.
It gets tempting to sometimes lean into your inner Luddite, and moments like this are basically a reminder of maybe shut up, Adam. Don't burn the textile machines quite yet.
Not yet. Yeah, every now and then you're reminded, like, oh yes, when you can find things that otherwise would never have gotten an outlet, it's good to have these technologies that make that possible.
So just before we go in, we originally recorded a 20-minute long or such introduction to also respond to Jacob Siegel's response to our podcast with him, which he wrote beautifully about on his newsletter, The Scroll, which he publishes for Tablet Magazine. And I recommend everyone to subscribe to it because Jacob's writing is phenomenal. So if you listen to that episode, Escaping the Gospel of Guilt, you might remember that at the beginning, Jacob and I got into a small sidebar debate about, I guess, natalism. Jacob chafed at my remark that I think there needs to be a high bar held by a person who is going to commit to having a child internally, personally, but that there needs to be some sort of personal threshold. Jacob thought I'm being ridiculous and a victim of the narcissism of I guess, the hyper-liberal, hyper-individualistic mindset. And following the episode, he further honed his perspective on the issue in a post titled, "You're so vain, you probably think this kid is about you." I really recommend reading Jacob's post. His response is touching, even though I still disagree on some fundamental points. And I will publish the response we recorded either in the next podcast or as a standalone episode. But I wanted to make sure to finish editing this episode today, so it comes out on Rami's birthday. Happy birthday. And as far as Jacob goes, listen to the original debate, read Jacob's post, and to be continued. And for now, welcome to Uncertain Things, the pod of belated and belabored introductions. We're uncertain.substack.com or wherever you get your podcasts. If you have a moment, please give us 5-star review on Apple Podcasts because this really helps. And if you really want to support us, you can drop a few schmeckles in the uncertain.substack.com paid subscription section, which we will also start creating some maybe like special content articles every once in a while, but mostly we want to keep things free, so it's really mostly about supporting our work and helping us make more in less time, but only if you can and only if you want. And that's it. With that,
right. Nancy.
yes, Lord knows, just in case. That's
the name of this podcast, right?
You have, first of all, you have a thing.
I have a thing on my tooth.
That's a
good way to start.
That's good. I will like not be able to. I'll be like trying to answer questions, but I'll be staring at the thing in your tooth the whole time.
Is it still there?
Let me.
Is it gone?
No.
Okay, I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go to the bathroom. Give me 1 second. Look for my tooth.
Yeah, we don't need Vanessa. What's happening?
You gave me post-credit content. Hey, Zev. Last time that Zev showed up in the middle of a podcast,
Yes.
I used it in the podcast, and he
Yes.
took offense.
But no, you can be like a recurring character. Like
That's what I
once
thought.
every
That's-
5 or
I was
6.
establishing.
Yeah, you were. See?
His presence was already alluded to in previous episodes, and when he suddenly actually showed up in the background, it was great. Hi Nancy. Hi Rami.
Hi, that's right. You know what? No one has ever called me that, but a friend of my dad's used to call my dad that. Used to call him Rami. I've never.
Somebody needed to carry that tradition.
Yeah, there we go. So
Is that a common thing in like calling people Rami?
No. The first time I met Nancy, already have read her work. I knew who she was, but the thought that was ringing in my head was, my God, I wish to reach a point in our relationship where I can call you Rami.
So he just started out. He's like, why not just start with that? No,
So I'll
but
manifest it.
It's I will say, so Rommelman is my last name. I do have 4 or 5 people, all men, that call me Rommelman. Hey, Rommelman. Yeah, I like it. It's all good.
Nobody felt lazy
Never.
enough to shorten it. Oh my
Never.
God, those fucking
Never.
millennials.
Yeah.
So first, before we dig into things that are maybe more interesting, I do want to
Maybe. I don't know. It's a high bar, dude.
I want to address the pink elephant in the room. I'm the only person drinking.
Oh, well, I'm having, what did we say? I'm having a blueberry basil tea made by the people
By
of
the Nazis?
By the, what did you say, of Germany. They're trying to make up for
Right.
Nazism.
That's from
They're
the people who brought you the Holocaust.
That's
comes
right.
The
This is
the mint basil.
fancy teas. They're like, maybe if we make this tea, people will forgive and forget. Yeah.
So how's it going so far?
We did reparations.
I'm feeling much better about the whole thing. Yeah.
Covered reparations. What next? But it's a shame nobody is drinking with me.
No, I'm sorry.
Maybe later. I'm having
Yeah.
a cranberry juice. For
Sure, we'll I'll hold my resentments, my grudges. So Nancy, Vanessa wanted to start like professionals by hearing about your illustrious career.
Oh, like in 30 seconds or less?
Up to 90 seconds.
Up to 90 seconds. I am a journalist and an author. I have been a journalist since 1994. My first feature article, which was about my 4th article in general, was driving across the country to interview John Wayne Gacy, the serial killer on death row, with a pen pal of his. It got a lot of play and sort of kind of got me a career. I lived in LA at the time, wrote for all the LA publications, was a nightlife columnist, feature writer, started writing books, and have been writing. That's all I do. I've written, 5 or 6 books. The last one was like the book I think I was waiting my whole life to write, or had it in me to write, which was called To the Bridge, A True Story of Motherhood and Murder. about a woman in 2009 who went to a bridge in Portland, Oregon, where I was living at the time, and threw her 2 young children off the bridge. Her 4-year-old drowned. Her 7-year-old daughter survived. And I really took a very deep dive, no pun, I'm sorry, into how this happens, sort of if you made a concentric circle from the people in the middle and then the people who investigated and then the community and why we think about these things. So it's definitely not a lurid book. I took a long time to write it. I'm glad with that book. I've written for the Wall Street Journal, LA Times, New York Times. I've been writing a lot for Reason magazine, including covering the protests in Portland all last summer and fall. And into this year, I just actually got back again. I've written 24 stories on the whole stuff out there, most on Reason, but also for The Dispatch and most recently for Persuasion. And currently, I am starting a new little media company called Paloma Media. We already have a YouTube channel. It's about 100 or so videos up there. We've got a podcast. You can go to any one of your podcatchers and find Paloma Media. And we will be launching the website in about a month. So that's it.
So much gumshoe.
So much.
You filled that part.
It's a lot of it is shoe leather reporting, meaning, you would go out. I was raised understanding that you go out and find stories, right? You go and talk to people. You go to the bar. You talk to the cops. You do all this. And I guess, we obviously still have this kind of reporting. But I think less than there used to be. I want to talk to everybody, like every single person, the barber, the criminal, the woman that made the donut. I just want to talk to everybody and try to understand stories the way that they're also understanding them, and then and hopefully bring them to people in a way that they appreciate being able to jump onto a bunch of different landing points for the story.
Is that what took you to Portland? Because of all the characters?
Well, it's interesting. I moved to Portland.
No, but before we actually go into the serious conversation,
yeah.
As you were giving the 90-second pitch,
yeah.
You reverted into the same tone that I have whenever I'm finding myself in the awkward position of interviewing for a job. Do you feel that when you're giving your elevator bio that you're regressing to you trying to get a job, or is it just like an autopilot?
There's just, I've been writing now, it's like 27 years. Like, what do you, what's a highlight? What's not a highlight? Like, what were the, the dead points? What were the points that really made me like weep, or I think had a story that had an impact? Like, I could tell you some stories. I wrote for 15 years for the LA Weekly when it was like a really, really tight, awesome paper where they gave you, hi, Nancy, you're hanging out at this like old man, single room occupancy hotel in LA, which I was with a friend of mine who lived down there. And I'm happy to mention it to my editor. She's like, give me 8,000 words on King Eddie's. Like, literally would pay you, and they paid well. Like, you made money to sit in a bar for 6 months and talk to people about their hardships and the lies that they told you. And the woman with the voice box was like, trying to pick up your husband. I mean, just like, like these kinds of slices of life. Like, this is a story that I think was kind of meaningful. So, but how do I say that in my 90-second elevator pitch, right? So no, I don't think I really am trying to. I'm kind of lucky right now in that at least some places that I like and respect, they want me to write for them. Not that I'm writing like all the time and big things all the time, because my stories tend to take a while. I don't. I have like so much admiration.
Because you do that thing called reporting.
Well, yeah, but you know what? Like, let me give you an example. Like, this other thing happened today. This other, like, apparently, like, Karen in a park yelling at someone with the dog, and, everybody's got a hot take. Well, how about having a fast take that's not hot? Like, being able to be the kind of reporter where you spend a couple of hours really looking around, trying to get some source stuff, being really calm about it. Oh, who's that? That's Robbie Suave over at Reason, who within, couple of hours of this happening gives a really super balanced story where he brings in voices and he puts in links. I don't know how to do that. Like, I mean, I can occasionally, like, sometimes some story will hit and I'm just like, bam, I got to write this right now and do that. But there are people that can do this like every single day. And because I don't do that, I have so much admiration for this. Whereas I know they feel like, oh my God, how did you write that 8,000 word story about, the girl with the broken leg? I'm like, I don't know. So, but anyway, no, I don't think I am pitching myself, but maybe I am. Editors, maybe I am.
I know. Because recently I Vanessa and I were invited to a nice podcast.
The Adventure Creator podcast.
When he asked us about ourselves, I found myself automatically going into that place of like, this is what I am. And my tone, I noticed, was shifting into the self-pitching place, and it really depressed me later on listening to it. But now I'm just projecting.
No, but we all have our stock speech that we've said a million times, our stories that we tell, and so therefore we have a cadence that is repeated.
Right.
I think it's just human nature.
I remember this.
I just brought my self-loathing to bear in this conversation.
When I was still living in LA, I moved from LA in 2004. I do remember hearing myself doing that occasionally, like at big editorial places. I'd be at parties or I'd be talking to one of my editors, and I would hear myself doing that, somehow like kind of shining my own little star. And I hated it every time I'd go home and go like, why did you do that? So I don't think I think it finally gets like bred out of you at a certain point.
If you're American.
Okay.
So back to serious stuff.
To Portland. So, I mean, it sounds like you've lived in a bunch of different American cities then.
I have lived in New York City, where I'm from. I've lived in LA, and I lived in Portland, and now I'm back in New York since end of 2019. I was in Portland living there, and I was reporting there, though Portland's a very tough town to report from. There's very little media. I mean, I wrote for everybody. I wrote for the city magazines. I wrote for the Alt Weekly, and I kept writing for national places, but it's not like New York. I mean, like, you just don't have any kind of media community. You have like a big fiction writing community, so that's good for that kind of writing. But I happened to be there when that story hit, and I spent a long, long time on it. But, in terms of the book. But in terms of the reporting for the protests, I already was not living there. I was already here. I'm good. I'm about to tell a story that I've told like 7 other times, and I apologize, but it is actually truly how I came to report on the story in Portland. We knew what was happening with George Floyd. I mean, I was here in the city. I was sometimes like running around after people, writing short things about protests, watching kids like smash up cop cars. And it was the beginning of July, and I was sitting in Matt Welch from Reason Magazine and
who we had on.
What?
Who we had on the podcast previously.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and Jake Siegel from Tablet. And
who was in our upcoming episode,
okay.
actually.
So it was just the 3 of us sitting in Matt's yard having cocktails. And
which we also had on our podcast.
Jake said to me, Nancy, what the fuck is going on in Portland? And right? Okay. And then Matt looked at me and said, you got to go. So I got up the next morning and I texted Catherine Mangu-Ward, who's the editor-in-chief of Reason, who I've written for many times. I'm close with those people. I love those people. And I said, I want to go to Portland for you. She said, go. So I got on a plane that day and filed 5 stories in 4 days or a week or something like that. Came back, went back again in August, came back, went back again in September, though didn't file then because it was the wildfires. And there was nobody on the street. It's the only time in the 100, they call it like the 100 days of nonstop protest. They like literally, it was so gross. It was weird. It was like,
did they feel like copyright infringement that somebody else was putting things on fire?
Yeah. Anyway, I went back in late October, early November. I was there during the election, and then afterwards, when there was still a lot of violence, I went back again in January. Not again. I think the last piece. Then I wrote a big feature for Reason. Oh, here I am self-promoting in the May issue of Reason about what happened. But Reason, I love Reason because they never ask you to report in any particular way. They want you to bring them the story, and it is a technically a libertarian publication, or not even technically, it is a libertarian publication. I am libertarian adjacent. I don't claim any particular affiliation. But they want you to tell the story straight. And they don't, nobody ever once has said to me, well, could you like maybe go? It's like, no. And that I just felt very, very fortunate, because one of the reasons in the yard that day is that, if Jake and Matt cannot figure out, these are 2 of like the best news people going, if they can't figure out what the fuck is going on in Portland, we have an issue, right? And the issue is, you've got the reporter in Kenosha standing in front of this absolute conflagration saying, well, it's really mostly peaceful. And then you have Fox on the other side saying, you better watch it because tomorrow they're going to be burning down your house. Neither of these things is true, and then there's weird little bits of truth. So why not get into the streets and actually see what's going on and actually report it, which of course, as you may know, and I know you do know, was not super popular because I was telling you who was doing what. And this was not popular with the kind of main message that was getting through in most of the media, which is you have to allow people to peaceful protest. And clickety click click click. I don't. So I was like, sure, of course you do have to let them peaceful protest. But what about these 200 to 600 people every night that are burning things down? And I think there was this sense that if you said one bad thing about anybody that claimed to be, there for George Floyd or there for BLM or there as anti-police, if you said one bad thing, then you were tarring the entire movement. I'm like, this is so juvenile. Look, open your eyes. How does it hurt you to say there are different grades of what's going on here? So I was fortunate that Reason wanted those grades. So that's Portland.
That's Adam with a pencil in his mouth.
I realized recently that I cannot trust my own memory to retain the questions that I want to ask, so I just had to take notes. No, it's just I wanted to put it on the record that I'm going senile. And first and foremost, your imitation of Jake is almost impeccable, but way too fast talking.
Oh, so it should be Nazi. What the fuck is going on in Portland? Yeah, but that wasn't very good. That wasn't good. He's like growly but sexy.
Yeah.
I can't. I don't think I have the right sex.
It's growly sexy with long pauses.
Okay. Yeah.
Which Adam knows from having edited it recently.
Okay. Got it.
Actually, before getting to my actual question, can you give us an example of one of the events that you covered in Portland that for you really struck home?
Well, it was very easy, actually, because when I got there, the federal building, Trump had sent in the federal forces to protect the federal building. And it had been already, the building next door to the federal building, which is the police station, had already been being, molested nightly since 2 days after George Floyd was killed, including, you had 10,000 people, something like that, march over one of the main bridges. And then, they were mostly peaceful. Yes. And then when those folks dispersed, the 200 or 100, however many were that stayed, I was not here when this happened. That was in May. I wasn't in Portland when it happened. They broke into the police station, which is also they call it Justice Center. There's also a courthouse, and they check in prisoners underneath. And they set fire. They broke the windows. They smashed all the office furniture. Meanwhile, in the basement were police employees checking in prisoners. And there was a fire on top of them. And they literally have their families calling them and saying, get the fuck out of the building. It's on fire. And they can hear what's going on upstairs, but they're basically barricaded in. Some of, not that night, but another police station, the protesters barricaded the police inside the building, some of the employees, and started setting it on fire. So when I got there, Justice Center, the police station, was already fencing and molested and graffitied and all this. And the federal building was surrounded by fences. And there were just thousands of people screaming. And thousands of people screaming and throwing incendiary stuff at the building. Now, what happens for the first couple of hours? First of all, there's no Portland police in sight. It's very odd when these things are going on in front of the buildings. But the feds are inside, but they're not doing anything for a long, long time. They kind of let it play out. Meanwhile, they're tipping lit up barbecues. If they can get past the fencing, they're smashing in the barricades and on and on and on. Then the feds start shooting out tear gas or other things, rubber bullets. So then everybody runs away and then they go back. So I literally get there. I'm in the middle of this. So I can see exactly what's going on. I can see exactly who's molesting the building. I can see what the feds are doing. And I can also very clearly see the sort of, they call it LARPing, right? Live action role playing. And it's very, very much in evidence. You've got the mostly girls with medic written across somewhere on their bodies. You've got the black bloc guys that have the leaf blowers or the fire, whatever they're shooting at the building. You've got the kids with press on their building. Literally, it just says a big in tape on their body or on their helmet, press. And I'm like, I've been, reporting for 25 years and I have never had press on my body. I've carried a press pass a few times, like in a murder investigation or something. Excuse me, a press pass that I made on my own computer. So there we go.
Like, not to reveal any trade secrets, but even our...
Yeah, you just make it on your computer. I mean, I had the New York Times give me I had to go into this scene where there had been a school shooting, but I was in Portland and I was like, they're like, drive up, get inside, do what you need to do. I'm like, how do I get, they're like, just like, print yourself up a press thing and put it, no, actually, I don't know if they said that, but I figured it out. You read
between the lines.
I printed out something that said press on a bright orange piece of paper and stuck it in my window and the cops waved me through. Trade secrets, kids. Anyway, I saw pretty quickly how this had really become sort of an identity. I mean, I covered Black Bloc and Antifa and Proud Boys before, so I kind of had seen how they went out each other. And this was just on a larger scale. And the eyes of the world were on Portland. Okay?
I'm actually not familiar with this live action
role playing basically means they're dressing up as characters and going at each other. So for instance, I've covered events where, it was going to be this big, terrible thing between Antifa and the Proud Boys. And they kind of go up to each other and bang chest and do all this stuff. And then everybody goes home. It's like they're almost like playing a part, until it gets more violent, which sometimes it does, right?
What was the name of that film? I forgot. There was a film about LARPing.
I've heard it in like a Comic-Con.
Like role models,
text.
Yeah, what they called it, there's another word for it.
Just like, could you imagine the people playing, dressing up as wizards and knights and fighting each other in the park?
Yeah.
Just with pretension to political activism.
So this was on almost a world stage, if you think about it. I mean, we had the George Floyd protests going on all over the world. There was no place in the world where they were as adamant about this stuff. And also because Trump had sent in federal forces than Portland. Portland had the eyes of the world on it. And I believe that the players knew this. I mean, how could they not know it? There was press everywhere. Plus there was all the press. So you could kind of see, and also I've written this many times, these are young people for the most part. They've been quarantined inside. School has been closed. Their work is probably closed for good. And they haven't been allowed to go outside. There's been no bars. There's been no movies. There's been no music. All of a sudden they can get out into the streets every night and save the fucking world, right? I called it, their nightly spurt of relief or release. And they were reveling in it. I mean, there's no doubt. Now, they definitely liked to present themselves as beleaguered and beaten by the police. I had a young woman run up to me and say, this is a quote, the police are killing all our Black friends in the street. And I was like, well, if you'd like to sit and talk to me, I can tell you that, in fact, at that point, there had been one police killing in Portland. It was of a white guy who had nothing to do with the protests whatsoever. But, don't bring the facts into this, because you need to believe that we're in a constant state of emergency and that your enemies are very clearly demarcated. They are the police. And then anybody else that
conveniently they wear uniforms.
They wear uniforms. Well, so were the Black Bloc kids. They're in their outfits too, right? So it was very easy to see what was going on to me. Now, I was, of course, told I was a fascist for not completely being on the side of that we're fighting the police. Well, I think it's very easy to call someone whatever you want to call them. I know this is untrue. But it very much became if you're not with us, you're against us. And it still happens. There was that young woman who was hit and knocked to the ground by a Black Bloc guy in Portland about 3 weeks ago. Marianne, I can't remember her last name right now, but I did communicate with her recently. And Matt Taibbi wrote something about it. And he's like, we're very much, and I've said this 40 gazillion times, we're very much blaming the right for all of the violence that has happened, let's say in Portland. I'm not going to speak about every incident. But I know from being on the ground there, I saw who was committing the violence every night. This does not mean there were not altercations with the right. There was. But that they were not the ones committing the violence every night. I was there. I was there dozens and dozens of nights. Anyway, he wrote something about this. It's like, this is not a particularly unusual case of Antifa or Black Bloc, committing violence against somebody that they see is not on their side. I'm not saying it's endemic, but it happens. And to say that it never happens is wrong. And so I wrote something about this. I actually got pretty hot under the collar about it. And I can't read all the comments, but there were probably about 4,000 comments of people coming at me saying that, I was a fascist for saying that. And it's like, well, to cleave to that line, I don't know how it helps them. I don't know how it helps their movement, or even if they're very invested in the movement. And I don't actually think people are. I think what's happening in terms of Antifa and all these fights, I think it's kind of dying down. I've written about this a bit for a lot of reasons. School is open again and people have jobs, and also
life is coming back.
Life is coming back, but not only that, it's like, to say this is the identity that I am going to pledge to. People have like other things to do. They may believe in the goals, and I think the goals, if you look at them in a simplified way, are in many ways correct. Of course, I don't want to abolish the police, and I don't think most people do. You want police reform? Sure. So do cops. Do you want equality? Do you want better opportunities for everybody? Of course you do. But the ways that they want to go about it, which is burning everything down, and I've said this again 50 billion times, these movements, especially in Portland, as we've seen, are incredibly good at breaking things. They're very, very good at that because that's very easy. But I have not yet seen them build a goddamn thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For these people that are writing comments to you on Twitter, obviously they're lodging attacks, calling you a fascist, but I'm curious if you think it's because they just cannot believe that the reality that you're purporting to see is actually it can't be true. Because I'm thinking from our conversation with like Congressman Meyer, and he was like there at the day that the Capitol was invaded by protesters, or however we want to. I don't know what the terminology is, but let's just whatever it is, it happened, and he was there and he saw it with his own eyes. Huh?
Insurrection LARPers.
Okay, he saw the insurrectionists enter the building, and the next day he had to talk to constituents that were telling him like that's not how it happened, and he had to say, well no, I was there, I observed it with my own eyes, I know what happened, and so I'm just curious if there's like a similar thing happening here where it's just like they can't accept that that's the reality you're seeing is the reality, and therefore you must be XYZ.
Like a total epistemic bifurcation.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I adore Peter Meyer. He knows that. I think that they're invested in the idea that they're the good guys because they can point to certain instances that have been terrible, like the killing of George Floyd or Breonna Taylor. And so they believe these things are wrong, which they are, which we all believe. And so they've created what they believe to be a solution or a fighting back. I don't think that they are. I don't think that they've achieved anything. I don't think that a solution or an ideology built on tearing things down is ever going to build anything holistically good for all. Mm-hmm. I think also it's just, I don't know how old these people are that are yelling at me, but a lot of them are like stupid memes or just literally one word. Like I had something, I guess in my first comment was, if who the fuck was committing the violence every night in Portland? And because, they were, let me back up. I was saying I had seen basically people on the left doing this every night. And I was like, if you were saying it's not, if you're saying that is not true, that what I saw with my own eyes and filmed, I have a video of a guy smashing in the federal building with a fire extinguisher and people around him, screaming, like just delighted. And one of the comments I got when I posted it last summer was, I can see that Nancy Rommelman staged this in a studio, and you know how I can tell from the shine on one of the person's helmets. Yeah, I'm like,
the flag on the moon wasn't flapping.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. The flag on the moon wasn't flapping. I said,
it was flapping. Sorry,
right.
I got my conspiracies mixed up.
I was like, if I saw this, I know that this is true, and if you're telling me it's not, then who the fuck committed that violence every night? And I must have had, I couldn't read all the comments, I didn't, but I saw at least 100 of them that said the police. And I was like, so the police were burning down their own stations every night. That's who, I mean, and it's ridiculous. I mean, it's very juvenile, actually, to not want to even take the time to investigate what you're talking about.
So, but you bring something that I really wanted to get into. There's conflation of the Twitterati knee-jerk reactions, which is this, and most of the people who bother to comment on Twitter are probably suffering from some new psychological virus, some pathology that we haven't adequately diagnosed yet, and something like it gives them the space to assert and validate themselves in a world that is growing increasingly harsh and lonely and too complex and disparate, that they don't have a cultural or psychological anchor with which to establish a sense of self and belonging and identity. So instead, they find social purpose and direction in being frenetic and relentless on Twitter. The more angry and binary they are, the more they feel that they're playing this version of themselves as heroes in their pathetic little tale. But well, this is a profound problem because it influences corporations. It influences it even influences the emotional state of the people getting these attacks, because you're bombarded by thousands and thousands of assholes. But this still doesn't explain why the people in the pick your cliche, the gatekeepers, the old establishment media, the CNN and the New York Times, and the people of supposed respectability buy into that and go with it, and do not have abdicated their sense of skepticism. That's what's so disturbing, because get angry at all the idiots on Twitter, that's one thing, but come on, like people who supposedly share job titles like us, similar to ours, have just taken certain orthodoxies for granted, and those orthodoxies conflict with the possibility of maybe the left has burnt up a building, or maybe those kids are just vandalists, like bored kids who are looking for an excuse to have some fun, and not the face of any moral and socially meaningful protest.
Or it's opposite. These are absolute 100% savages and throw all these kids in jail, right? Because that was what the other side was saying, right? Yeah. I think part of it...
And I think the reason that we keep dwelling on the left is because we just expect more. Like, we know... Yeah. I mean, for me at least, I when I see the Tucker Carlson giving it his worst, I'm like, I'm not surprised. And sometimes there is almost a bigotry of low expectation whenever Tucker Carlson says something incisive, there's like, oh... Yes, such a voice of intellect and bravery on the right. It's because of the low expectations from Fox. It's the New York Times that you expect to be stable and take itself seriously, take its responsibilities to tell the truth and, eschew anarchy.
I think that there's a couple of issues going on at the Times, but I'll take the one that I've written about before. When Trump was up for election, there were certain places in the country that got extremely excited, and there were other places that it was just complete hair on fire and terror that he was going to be elected. And I think Portland, really is one of those cities. And I think it voted, I can't remember, like 75 or 80% for Hillary Clinton, overwhelmingly. And I think when he was elected, Trump was just, sort of an exceptional provocateur, and he found an incredibly receptive city to provoke in Portland. Mm-hmm. And they all fell into this sort of communal fever, anti-Trump fever. And so they did everything. They marched, they did this, they did that. And they gained an identity. So did the mayor. He was going to be the one that was going to go up against Trump, and I'm not going to do what you say. And I think there was a little bit of the enemy of the enemy is my friend.
I always took the mayor to just be pusillanimous panderer.
Well, it's interesting because I knew someone who I quoted anonymously in the Reason piece who had been in city government, and he's like, Ted Wheeler is actually a smart guy, but and this is my words now. He painted himself into a corner. The enemy of the enemy is my friend. So Trump was the enemy. So who, of course, the peaceful protesters and your constituents are your friends. And so if there are some of these yahoos here, we're going to protect them because Trump is attacking them. And it became this, so he kept trying to also appease them. You also have an incredibly, I'm just using Portland as an example. We'll get back to the Times in a second. This incredibly progressive city council who, they wanted people to not have to be able to pay rent and they wanted them to not be arrested. It just kind of went on and on until the more violent protesters just started to sort of gain more, if not legitimacy in the city. They were excused. And so they were able to do more. It's like if you guys are not parents, but if you have a child and, she breaks one cup and you don't do anything, she's like, well, let's see what happens if I break 7 cups. Okay. And that's what they were doing. And to a certain extent are still doing, though. And I've said this before, I grow concerned that as the movement shrinks, and it has, it also becomes more concentrated and perhaps more dangerous. Because who stays? Okay? Who stays when the people that have jobs and love affairs and they want to go out to the concerts, who stays? You get the true
people who don't.
The true believers, the loners, the people that want to make a splash. And that concerns me. It's like, well, we don't have the status or the stature we once did. I know how to fix that.
Let me just say that you've just made me imagine Ted Wheeler as Cersei from Game of Thrones calling in the faith militant into the Red Keep.
Yes, actually to a certain extent. So who is he going to die down in the cave with, right?
In whose arms?
Yes, in whose arms shall Ted Wheeler die? So the Times, the Times has done some great reporting and they still continue to do some great reporting. But they definitely were erring on the side, they were anti-Trump. If you're anti-Trump, how do you become anti-Trump? Trump, that bastard, sends the feds in and also be, can you believe those kids attacking the federal building?
But that's not just it's not a satisfying answer for me.
I know.
I was at that point I was no longer at CNN, but I was working at CNN during the first half of the Trump administration. And it's more than that because and you're right, and we always make sure to state that the Times and all those institutions, they still do some great work. They're huge establishments, not whenever they get painted as just the peddlers of woke ideology, it's nonsense.
Sure.
The problem isn't that they are completely captured. The problem isn't that they have fully turned themselves into the OAN of the left, but they're
sorry.
But the people that you just expect more of are dropping the ball in such crucial moments. And a time like a protest like this, which is such a moment of social hazard, you'd expect somebody in charge to be an adult and talk about it seriously. And it's not just about the coverage of Portland. We're using this as was it a synecdoche for the state of the U.S., but the whole state of the protest, the way that defund the police was taken at face value and then propped up, all those things that are just madness that leave you baffled. What is going on? You know what? Give a hearing to what's the name of the author who wrote the book In Defense of Looting or whatever.
Oh my God.
Give her a hearing. But also give a hearing to the person saying this is fucking ridiculous.
This is lunacy.
Bumblefuck lunacy. But they wouldn't. And that's a dereliction.
I'll give you an example. But before I get to the example, I will tell you I listened yesterday and today to David Remnick interviewing someone, a Swedish professor who wrote a book called Why Activists Should Blow Up the Pipelines or something like that. I can't remember the name of it. And I was listening to this, and I was walking down Delancey. I thought my head was going to blow off my body. And I thought the same thing that you did. I was like, give this person a hearing. Yeah, sure. I mean, we want to hear what people are saying and why. But his ideas were so much, again, of destroy, destroy, destroy. In order to, that's going to be the solution. I was like,
Right.
okay, let's get back to the Times. Which
Who doesn't
actually,
love wastelands?
Yeah, right. And here's another thing. When you start saying you're going to blow up pipelines, and he's like, oh, I had this. Okay, so I'll go back. Okay, I have 3 more things to say here, right? When I was talking about the violence in Portland.
I envy your memory.
The violence in Portland. I have no idea how many people come back to me and said, there was no violence in Portland. There was no violence. There was vandalism. Violence is only against people. What you saw in Portland was vandalism, and vandalism is legit and okay because no one was hurt. I'm like, okay, well, if that's your out now, right? But in any case.
But words are violence.
Yes, that's right.
So bad tweets are the real violence.
That's right. So I was listening to this Swedish guy today, and he's like, well, what we have to do with the violence, not the violence, what we have to do is, when we blow this up, but, of course, you're not going to hurt any people. I'm like, oh, because that's the way that works, right? When you blow things up, there's never a chance that someone is hurt, correct? And then if someone is hurt, does it become another instance of, well, got to break a few eggs to make an omelet?
Did he say that?
No, but that is.
But that was
I will almost fucking guarantee you. You start blowing up pipelines, you're going to kill someone. That's. I mean, this is to think that you're not going to.
By the way, there are several.
Lunacy.
It's going to be a hierarchy until it reaches the someone where it's going to count as an egg, because first it's going to be
just a worker.
The worker who operates it, and is culpable, so that's fine. That's part of vandalism. Then it's going to be maybe the security guard, but that's part of the police, and of course that can go. So only when it reaches the bystander.
We'll see.
I was going to say it could be an endangered animal that lives around it. That would probably take them out.
So I'm going to tie in the other part. We're talking about, the Times. People like to pick heroes, right? People are simplistic. They want to see a good guy and a bad guy. I'm not saying the Times does this all the time. They don't. But I think in terms of the story, what was going on in Portland, they did very often. So I have a friend, Nellie Bowles. She's Barry Weiss's wife. She's a good friend. She was going out to Portland, and she I'd been reporting. And she's like, do you know some people? I want to go talk to some people. I was like, you should really go talk to my friends over in this one area. There was this thing. I gave her an instance of something that happened. I gave her some contacts. Turned out great for her. She wrote the story, which was very much a story I was actually going to write, but that's fine. No, it actually, I've written it in different ways. I'm teasing. It was a great story. It really was kind of a story I'd write. You go into a community, you talk about what happened, you talk to the people that it affected, you talk to some of the activists, maybe what they feel about it. This is the way you report a story. She was vilified from inside the building, right? Because the certain activist class at the Times, for other reasons, of course, there's jealousy at the Times. We can talk about Donald McNeil until my eyeballs fall out. I have so many opinions about that. But
just for context, if somebody doesn't recognize him by name, that's the New York Times. Was he a science reporter?
He had been at the paper for 45 years.
45 years, and got fired because a report. What was it? A trip that a year before,
several years earlier,
he apparently used the N-word.
He repeated it. A student on a trip had said it, and he repeated it back.
And it was in a context of debating whether or not it's legitimate to use the word in certain contexts.
Well, it was something like she was talking about a friend of hers that had used it, and how did he feel about that? And he said, well, did she say the N-word? And he repeated back what she was it a quote from a song, a book, blah, 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 blah. Well, some parents apparently got mad at it the following year, and then the Times called him in, and he said, well, they're like, well, whatever, let it go. But the year after that, after he'd been the star reporter on COVID, after he was being put up for a Pulitzer, after now he was the nice fancy. Oh, some people, kind of activist contingent within the Times, they wanted to relitigate that. But how did they do it? they called up, or someone, and actually, I don't think I can make this claim. Let's just say somehow a couple of reporters at the Daily Beast got some inside information from the Times and basically accused him in bold type of being a racist. And the story, it set on fire. And then there were some other instances of...
just to unpack the insanity of that story. First of all, it assumes, to work on any level, it assumes that just having uttered that incantation is tantamount to racism, right? That magical word, that's just having said that.
Magical word.
Just to use an imprecation, that's it. That's it. You're...
well, and of course it wasn't that at all.
Two more times and you've summoned Candyman. That's it.
I mean, I have written, if anybody's interested, you can go on the Paloma Media YouTube channel. I've done 4 or 5 episodes on it. I wrote about it for Newsweek. I wrote a very, very long piece that I'd be very happy if people want to read in the Dispatch about it. It was, in my opinion, it was people inside the building that, for whatever their ambitions are, they wanted to get rid of Donald McNeil.
Of course. So that was where I was going with this. So first of all, there's a bullshit assumption there that requires some social acceptance that we can all agree that we can all agree to pretend that we care that much about how that little incident. So, but we have the excuse that this word is of a unique status. Okay, fine. There's that. But then you have the idea that for that, the career of somebody who's worked for 40 years, clearly had no bad intention, is forfeit. And that is just a whole other... It's so nakedly has nothing to do with the politics or the social context, and everything to do with just the pathetic, emaciated state of news media in the U.S. and elites internecine fighting. Cowardice from the top, but just,
and mendacity.
And professional climbing, like ladder climbing on the bottom.
And here's, okay, so 2 things. One, you had Dean Baquet, who's the, executive editor, or editor-in-chief, whatever he is, basically during this whole instance coming out and saying, McNeil has to leave, and
after he said he doesn't need to leave,
he didn't.
Changing his mind.
He said context doesn't matter. Like, no matter how this word was used, context doesn't. And it's like every single news person I knew was like, excuse me? What the fuck are we doing here then? Why don't I just throw a bunch of fucking words in a bag and dump them on your goddamn doorstep? Context doesn't matter, right? Nothing matters. It was so insane. Then, of course, he backtracked. There's the whole inside story.
And this is also, before we go there, like, it's just to dwell. And by the way, the reason I dwell on all these like meta points, because one of the reasons that I thought I could have fun with you is, aside for it just being like batshit, is I look for an excuse to have like a kind of a, I don't want to say high level because that sounds sophisticated, but
we are
just like
definitely not
a really like lowbrow conversation of media, and I thought you were
I am your
good
lowbrow
partner. No, just I wanted to dwell on that point. There's so many brackets within brackets, but what you said, the context, just how crazy it is for a journalist to say that during the after Trump election, and when there was a whole triumphal chest thumping pride of democracy dies in darkness, it takes a journalist to find the truth, and Apple is not a banana, et cetera, et cetera. One of the things that they celebrated is we bring context. Like, Trump is a master of prevaricating and saying things that are technically true, but they elide the context. That was a line that was pushed by the Times, by the Post. This is the reason you need us. This is the reason that you need to sign up to our subscription right now before journalism fucking dies. And it's all true until the singularity of the N-word, at which point context just evaporates.
But the N-word was an excuse. It was
an
excuse. So
my point is nothing matters. Nothing means anything.
I grew concerned. Well, first of all, just to say, in terms of Nellie Bowles, she was getting the same sort of attitude, and things were getting more and more uncomfortable for the kind of reporting that she was doing, which I see as very balanced reporting. She just left the paper. After 10 years, she just left. She's like, has better things to do. If you can't write the stories you're finding, then I don't want to be there. Like you can't write for a public. I have had so many. I ran a clubhouse for a while on policing, and I had a lot of people, or actually some public information officers, say to me, "Do you have your publications ask you to report stories in certain ways?" Because they certainly had dealt with journalists that had to do that. Like they needed to get the clicks, and I was like, never. And I would never work for a place that asked me to slant a story. Could you make it a little more, I mean, obviously if I haven't done my reporting right, or if we want to highlight something, of course, that's called editing. But in terms of having a slant, what really does concern me, let's say at the Times, is if this is the way certain people at that paper or any institution think is the way to get ahead. It's sort of like there was that game when we were kids, Chutes and Ladders. It's like you have to go around the board, but sometimes, you can just like take a shortcut. Well, if the shortcut is proving successful, maybe your Pulitzer is being called into question, but this other guy, you don't maybe want him to get his Pulitzer. Well, maybe we can just get rid of him and we can just do it super quick. And these things happen. These things happen quickly. And I grow very concerned at how people see that as legitimate. They see that as this, or maybe the legitimate way to get ahead is to get rid of people that you don't like. I think this is criminal.
The brilliant thing about it is that they found, and I don't want to make it sound as if somebody was plotting it out intentionally, but it's at this point an unacknowledged collective understanding of what the path to professional promotion is these days. In the past, to promote yourself, you needed to do some research. You needed to figure out who was sleeping with whom and then leverage that, do all that sleaze. Now you're promoting justice while promoting yourself. This is beautiful. It's synergy. It's a win-win. You advance professionally and society becomes more righteous. And I'm sure that at least a majority of these people who are involved in these ad hoc mobs believe that they are serving some higher good in doing so, while obviously the reason their heart is thumping so loudly isn't because they're saving the world, but because they can see the big prize waiting for them.
I think it's a couple of things. There's that phrase, like the way you live your days is the way you live your life. If this is the world that they're creating, I'm not sure how they expect that to be a beautiful world,
right?
Or a world that won't eat them eventually. And they've created it. I also I feel quite strongly that people become addicted to the destruction of others, and they begin to look for the next snack, the next rage calorie. I think I used that phrase with you one other time, Adam. What is the next thing? I saw it in Portland. First it was Trump, then it was the police, then it was the feds, then it was the landlord, then it was the DA, then it was the mayor, then it was your professor. They become, I think in order to constantly feel emboldened and right without doing any actual work, you just need to you need to defeat a series of people that aren't even in your enemies. If this is the world they're creating, God help them.
Well, you were also alluding to another backstory before.
I think we've seen this with other journalists. That's time we saw it with Alison Roman, who I adore, who was I don't know I don't want to get the specifics of her story wrong, but let's just say, as we all know, it's very, very easy to drum people out of decades-long careers now in a matter of days, without evidence. Without evidence.
More, so you feel like it's easy, like the.
You're on your mic, Adam.
Oh, sorry. They're paid more, so the executives are more than happy to see their careers tossed. That it's a boon for the company because they.
That's an interesting point. If people want to follow me on Twitter, I'm Nancy Rom, NancyRomm, and I pinned a tweet up there last week. It's a 2-minute video of Matt Welch and I in Paloma Media Studio. I'm going to leave it there for a while, and it basically encapsulates a lot of what we're talking about, and in terms of how I think it's actually impossible to create a better and sweet world from all this bitterness. I think it's like I said to someone the other day, it's like trying to make a blueberry pie from turds. Like you just can't do it. So let's see what world they think that they're creating. And at some point, maybe they think that that's not the world. And then also, and then I'll shut up for a second because Vanessa hasn't said one word here. Obviously, this is not the whole world. There's plenty of us that don't operate, under these, we kind of do operate under these conditions, but we kind of also don't because we create our own stuff, our own podcasts, our own media companies. We write for publications where that shit don't fly. So, it's not the whole world. Sometimes we think it is because we're Twitter addicts, but it's really not. Most people don't give a crap about this, though they may not know how much it might be infecting their world.
Right. No, and that's why I keep going back to why this thing matters. And this is something that Vanessa and I sometimes discuss because Vanessa comes from a very different perspective than mine on all of this, and she'll express that in a second for herself. But I often feel the need to explain why I am so angry about these things, and that's why I started by separating, for instance, the general Twitter mob, which I find depressing for its own right, because this is the way that so many people do communicate right now, and it is harming people's perception of the world. But that's not the thing that primarily bothers me. But institutions like the Times still have clout internationally, still have, and I think part of my perspective is as an international, as I don't know if I'm an expat or an inpat or whatever I am. But as somebody who's not immediately, readily, or accently American, the very clear idea of how the impression that CNN and the New York Times still evoke around the world, and how their reporting is taken for gospel, and when they drop the ball, it cascades. So either we get inaccuracies being taken for fact around the world, or we have just a loss of trust in American media institutions, both of which, in my view, are bad outcomes. But I'll shut up.
No, I think, so Adam and I have this problem where our tagline of our podcast is supposedly everything is broken, now what? And we have a tendency to just sit and wallow in the broken and not actually think about the now what. And I think a lot of what you've been saying about this tendency to want to destroy without some sort of vision or hypothesis or action plan for what do we build next, I think is the thing that, for me, is the thing that makes me most pause and be reflective. I don't get instinctively angry in the way that Adam and you probably do when someone gets fired from their job. I'm like, oh, that's a bummer, but it doesn't keep me up at night in the way I know it does for Adam. But this idea of what are we building towards in this kind of growing fireball of destruction. I think when we talked to Rebecca Henderson with the capitalism, end of capitalism book, she wrote this book, and her point was that we don't need to destroy capitalism. We can work with it within the system to create better world.
Right. Make it better.
Right. Make it better. And it makes me think a lot. So one of the things that I do a lot of reporting on is developing real estate development. So literally building new things. It is incredibly hard to build new things. The dynamics at play are that either if you don't do 100% affordable housing, you don't want it. Is one contingent of the community, and then another contingent will be like, well, I don't care, make it all luxury, but I just don't make sure the shadows don't go on my property or whatever. And there's just no middle ground for how can we come together to get some affordable housing, which would help towards the people in your side of the community, and how do we get some luxury so that it offsets and makes the project pencil. And so there's all these conversations where it's at the end of the day, it almost feels like they'd rather have nothing but have their principles than to create something that would
tasty.
Well, this is where we find ourselves, right? How do we find some sort of way to actually build something together as opposed to just sticking in our corners and hope and
well, maybe the little catch there is together. I mean, I see so many people building things. I live in Chinatown, and there's a pandemic, and it's doom and gloom and doom and gloom and doom and gloom. The Post asked me, I was one of some people that were writing about write about the ghost town that is New York. Right, this was in the spring, and I was like, well, how about if I write about Chinatown? Where this shit is popping. Okay, it is popping. Is all of it gonna slay? No, of course not. But you know what? People are creating things. I mean, we're creating something. We're creating a new media outlet. Is it going to be incredible? I don't know, but it's going to be hopefully fun and interesting, and nobody's giving us permission to do it. And I'm not waiting for somebody to tell me that, we can all do this together. I'm going to bring my little piece of pie to the party. And, you guys, you're going to bring your little piece. Or we're doing it right now. You're just creating something, and that adds to the world. Maybe 6 people listen to it. And they're like, oh, I think that's kind of cool. I mean, that's what I want to do. And I think I know it's completely doable. You don't need to, have your board of directors with 20 people and $15 million. You really don't. I mean, how long have we known each other? 4 months. And in that time, I built a freaking studio. I mean, it's rolling for really very little. So, maybe we don't all work together, no matter what the Democrats and the Republicans tell us we're supposed to be doing here. But we bring this individual stuff and make little shiny constellations and,
You're so Matt Welshie.
Yeah, it's funny. He and I kind of get along.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Sing songs together. Yeah.
It's just this is where when we had him on, it's the point where we kept getting stuck, him and I.
He said he was so sunny, and you were like, no.
Yeah, pretty much. It's like, but individuals like you are like, I come on your podcast, I come on other people's podcasts. We're talking, and we're spreading the word. So who gives a fuck? Honestly, for me, I think it's just the result of growing up at the outskirts of the empire, and then at a later age moving into Rome to see the empire collapsing. Mm-hmm. And also in the back of my mind, realizing how it's going to affect the rest of the world. Because I guess locally, that's true. It's like, who gives a fuck? Like, I don't need to worry about what's happening in Texas with voting rights and abortion, or I don't need to worry about what happens in Portland with crazy LARPers burning down City Hall. I could just do my own thing here and then go out and have my little Vietnamese dinner in the restaurant next door.
But you're really not. You really are caring about those things. You're talking to Peter Meyer, and you're talking to me, and you're bringing it to the people. I mean, we can't, I can't, I mean, God, if you tried to care about everything, you lose your mind or get like super depressed, but you care about
I can do that.
You what?
I can do both.
Okay, well, I can't. Like, I can do like 2 things, right? I can bake and write. And like, that's all I can do. And so...
No, depression and losing my mind, that's the...
Are you good? You're expert? Yeah, I feel like very positive about it all. I mean, but I definitely can get super mad. Like I'm still mad about the Donald McNeil thing. I'm
So why did that
apoplectic.
why did that one hit you harder?
Because it was so incredibly bald. It was so clear what was going on. And we also unwatched it roll. Like we knew like the day it kind of started doing some research on it, had people talking to me from, inside the building or people that had left. But everybody, it was like, I mean, everybody just, it was like, this was so incredibly bald. And we saw it roll out very quickly. We saw Times leadership collapse. We saw them absolutely be clown and basically befoul themselves. And we saw this activist contingent with absolutely garbage claims that they wanted a personal apology from Donald McNeil. And they also wanted the whole thing relitigated, including, and she said she didn't do it, so I can't say, it was said that Nicole Hannah-Jones basically said, I'll start calling the parents of the kids. I'll start getting their stories. This is 2.5 years later for something that the Times had already put to bed. She also did not do a very good thing when she was contacted and basically doxed that one reporter.
Yeah.
And that's the piece I wrote for the Dispatch. And
it's beautifully written, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
It's just like the scene, the dynamic. I
thought that piece was actually a really interesting piece to write with some calm, because there was like a little distance. I don't know when I wrote that, I guess in February or March. It had some distance and could kind of let people have their say and just roll it out. And again, what I really like the reader to just decide for him or herself. And I think the players were pretty clear on what they were doing there.
Context: the story is about a reporter from the Beacon, right? The version of Free Beacon, who was doing some reporting following after the firing, right? Or after the firing of McNeil, he started checking out whether there were other provocative statements, specifically use of the N-words done by other New York Times authors, and
over the past years, and he had found a bunch, including Nicole Hannah-Jones,
right?
And so he asked her.
He asked her about this, as a reporter does, and sent her a DM, and rather than respond to him or block him or whatever, or refuse to give a comment, she I think screenshot it or just and wrote about it and basically doxed him.
His phone number
gave
was
his
there.
phone number, and he was getting like hate calls.
While he was trying to play his new video game at his parents. I mean, he's a young guy. So.
Yeah. If you're working for the Washington Free Beacon, you're not making a lot of money.
And I think he's like 23 or something. So it's So it was an interesting story.
By the way, one of my partners from media company that I created that has turned me as jaded as I am now was originally the managing editor of the Beacon. Just for context,
Aaron Sabarium is his name. Just in case people want to know.
Of the reporter.
Yeah. Yep.
Beauty. Let's talk a little bit about beauty.
Oh, that's so funny. Isn't that how this all started?
Yeah.
Let's jump tracks, dude. Let's jump tracks. We had an interesting conversation. So
we were
on the
drunk
subway.
back when you were still drinking. We were both drunk
on the subway.
Kind
of drunk after we had a very nice dinner.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and we were on the subway coming back from Baccia's, and we started talking about beauty, and I started talking about beauty as a commodity. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure why. Something had happened. And you were talking about how you and your mother had a lot of conversations about beauty.
Yeah. So beauty is just something that always fascinates me. Because my mom, one of her, she's a musician and a writer. And we always talked about from like a very young age about how, I would respond, but it was her leading the way about the power of beauty, both as a commodity and as a social force. She was keenly aware of how she was using her own beauty as a teenager, how much authority and power it gave her. And she was a straight A student, but she was reflecting about how insignificant the power of her intelligence was compared to her beauty.
Whoa.
And the power it gave her to manipulate her environment. But she was also very much aware of the clock that was ticking over that power. And I guess that connects to her an obsession that we share, and I guess maybe it's in our genes. At least the Jewish part of the family is notoriously obsessed with death. We start thinking about death from when we were 3.
From birth.
So she very early on started thinking about how it's going to vanish soon. She was clocking the time until that power vanishes, and how at that point the power dynamic is going to flip, and then all the work that I have done will mean not.
What?
And that's it's going to become a whole other game, and she's constantly thinking about this even today. Like, she's a admired and respected musician and author in Israel, but if she goes out to a bar, she feels invisible. And if you think, sure, people are going to give her the nod of courtesy of a familiar face or somebody whose work has garnered some accolades over the years, but that sexual tension that makes life exciting and worth living, that affirms that you exist, that you're a thing, that part is missing. And when I'm saying sexual tension, I obviously don't just mean the carnal urge of I want to fuck you right now.
Right. The erotic charge.
The erotic charge that makes every intellectual discussion more worthwhile. And that in that sense, she feels that she has become totally invisible. She will sit there and the conversation will just happen around her. And sometimes they will ask for her opinion, but as they do, they will look past her to the hot girl, the hot 20-year-old behind her. So that's been her fixation, I think, all her life. And growing up around her, I realized how dishonest we are as a society talking about this. with that aspect, that power and that decline is something that we never deal with honestly, I feel, in popular art, in conversation, in journalism. Like it's and especially now where we're suddenly giving so much room for more abstract concept versions of power, when power is not just what laws you pass, but also what legacy you've created and what ideas you have running in your mind, even in terminology you're using that you're not necessarily aware of its origin. That's part of the idea of critical theory. You have so many words and concepts in your mind that you did not necessarily put in there yourself. We are still failing to address that aspect of, I think, human existence. And when you said beauty is a commodity, I think it just brought all of that
on the F train or
totally,
whatever.
on the F train in a second.
All the best conversations are on the F train.
Apropos the F train.
So, what do you think about that?
It's interesting because
You just hijacked the podcast.
no, I know this story a little bit. I know Adam's mom a little bit, who does happen to be a very beautiful person. And I met her, I guess, past her peak prowess, I guess, according to her own definition. I think for me, I was probably the opposite. As a young person, I was very...
You're still a young person by here.
As a younger person, let's say, I'm saying like teens age. I was very afraid of being sexually recognized. And because I was one of the smarter people in the school, I went to like great pains to kind of like hide my body and wear big sweaters, so that people would be forced to interact with me as an intellect and not as a person in a body. And it wasn't until years later that I could start to access some of that power. But I would say it's always been kind of a fraught thing that I don't like to acknowledge is true, even though I saw the difference between the way people reacted to me when I was hidden physically versus when I was well-dressed, put together, took care of my body. And there was a tangible change in the way that people talk to me. But I do think it's hard for me to disentangle that from the confidence that I myself had at that point in my life, being older. But I mean, I would agree that it is a thing, it's real, but I also think it doesn't have to be the defining quality.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And probably shouldn't be.
Right.
Nancy?
I think there is a time in a young woman's life when she's, 13, 14, 15, when you all of a sudden realize people are responding to you in ways that are interesting. You don't really get it completely at first. And, some of it's kind of gross, of course, like the dads. It's like, ew. And then, of course, you play with it. You try it out. It's like, wow, if I kind of like make my eyes a little squinty at this guy, he's gonna have the what do we call it? Like the
gaga. Or something.
What is it? Like, what did I call it with my daughter walking with her? I was walking with her. She was like 14. And she's really tan. She had on these shorts. We were coming, and this guy was walking toward us, and I literally saw his brain completely scramble. And we call it the brain scramble. And you just it happens. And here's the thing, we do not know this guy. We were walking past each other in an airport. He didn't want anything from her. She didn't want anything from him. They were not going to have any particular exchange. She was not trying to do anything. This was an absolutely sort of biochemical emotional reaction. He just kind of went like, and we walked past him, and I was like, we just started to laugh a little bit because there was nothing that, I don't think there was anything he could do about that. There's nothing she could do about it. It's just sort of something that we respond as humans. Why do humans respond to beauty? What is beauty? Well, someone will say, well, how can you say what beauty is? Well, I can't, because we're not going to all think the same thing as beauty. Most of us think our children are beautiful, I think youth I remember being a kid and, you think you're ugly, or you think, oh my God, that boy is so ugly. And then 20 years later, you see a picture of him in the yearbook and he's beautiful. Youth happens to be beautiful. Why? I remember when my daughter was maybe 10 and she said to me, Mama, why do people get ugly when they get old? And I said, well, Maybe it's because like we're not really supposed to procreate at that age. So like, I don't know, we have less appeal to the opposite sex. I don't know. We do. We fall apart. We're like you buy a toaster. It's beautiful. 50 years later, the toaster, it's okay. It still makes toast.
At some point it becomes vintage though.
Yeah. Beauty is I've seen it in myself. I've seen it with my daughter and her friends. I've seen it with other people. It is a commodity. Can it be used for good and ill? Of course. Just like anything else. You can use your car for good or for ill. I think it would be a terrible predicament to have beauty be your only passport or your only ticket. Though I guess you could be like, Heidi Klum and totally, make that work. I mean, that's possible.
But the real funny thing is, and I think that's where it's interesting to me, and that's part of what we were talking about in the F train that night, many moons ago.
Yeah, at least 4 months.
Was that the discomfort in acknowledging just how much it affects us. Because of course we can all agree that this should. I mean, we've all seen the gazillion Disney movies that tell you beauty is not the thing that defines you, and yet we know that you'll hear two people in a debate making the same argument, and one of them will be the shimmering beauty, and the other person will be, like, say, me. You will not listen to me. You will listen to the guy who, or the girl, or whoever exudes that erotic charisma.
Well, but there's nothing that this person. I mean, you could put a bag over your head. I mean, there's nothing. Look, people are packages of things, right? Someone's tall. Someone's got these kind of hair.
That's right. But the thing is that the impact that these small, obvious things have on us, we keep trying, because we still live. I'm gonna over-explain it, and I think it's part of our modernist existence that we put so much emphasis on rationalism and theory and our own ability to work things out through reason, that we deny just how much impactful those other things really are. And again, my point is, coming from a world where we're talking about critical race theory and how much our biases can override our rationality, and even rationality itself is to some extent subjugated to our historical and linguistic biases. And part of it is bullshit and part of it is true. We're still not really ready to reckon with the social force of beauty. Like, some of the hypocrisies that I sometimes see is like, I don't want to name names, but every once in a while I see, talking about oppression and all those like lefty ideals.
The lefty ideal of oppression.
The lefty ideal. I was thinking the same thing. But that's kind
more
of true, right?
We'd like to admit.
In vino veritas. But anyway, you see the people who have become the faces of this debate, the media figures who will go on to explain the problem with privilege and the danger of unexamined biases, prejudices, and social undercurrents. And they tend to be beautiful, camera-ready, photogenic humans, and of both sexes, of both genders, or whatever. And you know that to some extent that's why they are the faces of this discussion. And this avoidance or discomfort with admitting that is something between dishonest and craven, at least seems to me. And I guess there's also the element that the people who are talking about privilege, etc., view gendered relations and sexuality as primarily socially constructed. And then the idea that it's something so immediate, so inexorable, at least somewhat flies in the face of it being completely socially constructed.
Well, okay, hold on a second. So completely supposed to be socially constructed by
the people who talk about oppression.
By the 7,600 people that talk about this shit. Every fucking other person in the world is like, okay.
This is bullshit.
I don't want to give them any more air.
Okay, sure.
Okay, I want to give an example, though. I want to talk about beauty for a second for someone we know. Okay. I think Batya Angar Sargon, who is my editor at Newsweek, a friend, I think she is outstandingly beautiful. I mean, just such a knockout. But do you know what makes her scintillating? What makes her scintillating? It's her fucking brain. And it is her kindness. Like when last time we had dinner there, I had been sick the week before, and she came up to me. She's like, why didn't you call me? Like actually kind of pissed off that I had not picked out, like, well, because she's like, Nancy. And also the way she writes and the way she thinks and her generosity. Right. She freaking sparkles.
She's all of the above.
The whole package. Okay, this woman, yes, she's beautiful. And she's not, I mean, I don't know how old is she? 38? I don't know how old Botcha is. I mean, she's not like 23, like, no, but she's beautiful. And maybe, you know what? Okay, we don't appreciate that kind of stuff when we're 20. We don't see beauty packages the same way we do when we get older. But I got to tell you, I was talking again with my daughter, and she's young, but she has friends that are already, in their 30s, and they're using the Botox and this and that.
This is a thing.
It's a thing as maintenance, right? And some, that's what they say. It's as maintenance.
Common.
And
oh my God.
My daughter had a very good point the other day. She has a couple of friends. I've known these girls since they were teenagers. And she's like, well, so-and-so and so-and-so have always been comfortable in their bodies with who they are. They're doing things. They're beautiful, but they're like, and they'll do like the tiniest little bit every 6 months. One gets like a little boop in their head to whatever the line in the forehead. Two others, she's like, these two others have never been comfortable. And they're both beautiful girls, but they've never been comfortable. And now they're starting to, to do all this stuff, which is really, if you think about it, it's like a zero-sum game for everyone but the plastic surgeons, because you want to look beautiful, but you also are going to wind up looking like everybody else.
Right.
You're going to have the platypus lips, and you're going to have the face that doesn't move. And anyway, beauty is something that exists in the world. And you're right. People don't talk about it because then it's like, I don't know, are you conceited, or do you have a leg up and you're not supposed to? I mean, does beauty open doors? It does open doors. This is undeniable. But you got to fucking perform when you get there. That's how it is. You might get a job, I don't know, selling cosmetics because you're beautiful.
No, of course.
You got to perform, and then it's just like an extra thing. It's
it's not. It's never. It's like I said. That's why I use my mom as an example. I don't think you can live. Again, Heidi Klum and people literally turn beauty into.
But they also
career.
Work their asses off.
Exactly. No. It's not the illusion of like that's it. That's the one ticket. Right. No. I just think my fascination with it is not as simplistic as that. It's the fascination of it's a real fascinating power that exists and then vanishes, and that particular moment where it is salient is something that is interesting. I don't think it's bad. I don't think it's good. I think it's just obvious, but it's one of those obvious things that societally it seems to be impolite to acknowledge.
Yeah, because it's like not everybody has it. Like everybody could go out and buy a nice BMW, right? But not everybody can be tall. Not everybody can be beautiful.
That's the thing. But not everybody can be rich, and not everybody can be white or male. But we talk about male and privilege, and we talk about obviously wealth is a privilege, and we talk about everything as a privilege. But beauty privilege is something that we just don't really acknowledge.
And people try to, look at. I mean, it's this massive industry, to try. It's such a great.
No, but we don't, because the same industry that will talk about privileges will talk about how you're beautiful the way you are. And I think that's why I'm so fascinated by this.
That's interesting. I was talking to someone the other day, because you see a lot of body positivity ads now. Great, fine. But there was something on the train, I don't remember what brand it was, and they were talking about like, all bodies are beautiful and everything. That's fine, sure. I mean, I'm not in charge of what people think is beautiful or not. But I wonder, and they had some quite heavyset gals, like, not just a little round, like quite large. And I thought, well, there is the health issue. You do 300 pounds is probably not a great weight to be walking around if you're a gal, and also, do you feel comfortable in your body? I mean, I think we all I like to feel comfortable in my build. Like I like to be able to walk outside and do this. You want to go running, you want to feel good. That's a barometer for me. And I wonder, even if you tell people like, it's all good, you are perfect the way you are and should deserve love and respect 100%. But I wonder if that changes the way they feel. I don't know.
There's this wonderful short story that I don't remember who wrote it, but I always loved it. And I think over the years, I learned to love it more, about a guy who would wear like I think a mirror over like he would have a cap with a mirror so he can always see himself as he talks to other people. So he knows how he reacts to those people.
That's like,
oh my God, that sounds like hell.
It's proto-Zoom. It's what we do all the time now.
Oh yeah, it is.
Yes, but the insight there, and I remember distinctly not really getting it the first time I read it, but which was like 7th grade or something. And over the years, I started to really appreciate it, because you don't immediately realize how happy some people make you and how miserable other people make you, and how you respond to the way that they see you. And in the sense of beauty positivity and all that, you can tell people, you can try to tell people to feel good about themselves, but ultimately the thing that makes you feel good is when you see the way people look at you, and you feel and that's not just
100%, 100%.
That you can't fake. And it's sometimes it's beauty, but sometimes it's because you said something smart, or because you flirted the right way, or because you had chemistry with the other person.
There are people that make you glow.
But some people make you glow, and some people make you shrivel, and some people make you angry.
I have one little thing I read years ago. Dustin Hoffman, he was doing that movie Tootsie, where he was dressed as a woman. Mm-hmm. And he was in hair and makeup for the movie, and they did the whole thing, and he looked at himself and, with the wig and the makeup and the clothes. And he said to the makeup guy, and he's like, okay, great. Now make me pretty. And the guy was like, that's not how it works.
No, that's the After Effects, guys. That's in post. That's it. I guess this is what we ask all our guests.
Oh, yes. I'm glad you remembered the final question, because I had forgotten.
See, that's why you need to drink more.
Yes.
What do you see as the blind spots on the left and on the right?
The biggest blind spots.
The most urgent
There
blind
was
spots.
an interesting article last week in The Atlantic, I believe, from Sally Sattel, talking about how the left does not see its own authoritarian tendencies, whereas the right will sort of cop to its authoritarian. It's like, yeah, what's a big deal? Apparently, I was listening to something earlier today. It might have been Fifth Column. No, it was actually the Reason Roundtable. Anyway.
Either way, Matt was there.
I think the left has become very enamored with destroying people. I think that the obsession with race above everything all the time, everything is incomplete if not benighted, sometimes benighted. I think a lot of people have lost their moral compass on both sides. When I'm listening to David Remnick of The New Yorker, kind of with a pretty calm face, talking to this guy about, blowing up pipelines. I'm not saying he should not speak with him, but it was in a way, and I can give you an exact example. The guy was saying to him, like, well, have you seen movements where violence has worked? Because we know historically in the 60s, people were nonviolent. And he's like, well, the guy was like, well, look at the summer, after George Floyd, look at the violence vandalism, whatever, in this U.S. That really, was a big thing, had a big impact. And I'm thinking, did it? Like, I don't know what was built from that, but please go on. Instead, Remnick's like, well, but now all those thousands and thousands of people, the vast majority was peaceful. And I'm like, okay, do we have to do this again? Do we have to walk this train again? So I think that they think they're being really right and solving things. I I don't see it. I think they're going down a dead end. And I think a lot of people know that, but it is infecting or impacting. But impacting is not a word, right? Apparently, if you say impacting, people are going to hate you and
I'm fine with
say
it.
that is not a word. So I didn't say it, actually. I said something else. I meant my tooth was impacting. No, I think it is. It's affecting. It's affecting institutions, and that becomes problematic when everybody is
eroding
terrified
institutions.
for their jobs or terrified of saying the wrong thing. I think that is more on the left, though some of that is also on the right.
But how would you, because we believe in reductionism, how would you describe that? What is the core problem there? Is it bloodlust? Is it ideological capture? Is it?
I think they're afraid to look like they're not supportive. I think the vast majority. I think there are very few true believers of this particular moment. I think you have people afraid. And then they convince themselves that they will, shout a little louder, and then maybe they are really swept up in it. I mean, how do authoritarian movements start? Does everybody, believe in it right away? It's like, oh, it just, Nazism is born, fully formed. No, it's not how it happens. People, it's slow. They get fooled. They get
It's
convinced.
that maybe it's not so bad after all.
Well, oh God, I was reading a review in the Wall Street Journal today of a book, and they were talking about in Poland what Poles, in order to denounce or reveal where your Jewish neighbors were hiding, it got to the point where people would do it for a cup of sugar. It becomes it's like not such a big deal, right?
But there's a term in sustainability about this where like you keep getting acclimatized to the new norm and you no longer think it's urgent
the
anymore.
frog in the boiling water, or
there's like a term for this.
I remember reading, or many, many, many years ago, a book on the Holocaust, and it was a professor. He was not Jewish, but he said, the laws against Jews started, and it was like grass growing, like you didn't see it, like you saw it, but you didn't really see it, and then it was over your head.
Right.
The problem on the right, I mean, I don't follow the sort of allegiance to Trump that other people do in terms of reporting on it. But I know last week we had some pretty smart people that I admire writing about it. Andrew Sullivan was one. I think David French might have mentioned it as well, that this is a real groundswell or a continuing swell. And they feel that, he's going to get elected in 2024. I think that's a problem. I think it's a problem. It's almost the same sort of problem in terms of following this sort of authoritarianism. I mean, I'm no fan of Trump's, and I also think he's so transparently a manipulator that it kind of is frightening that people that you see that we've elected and put in positions of power would readily feel, whether they actually believe it, they've actually, drunk the Kool-Aid, would be so fucking happy and eager to be manipulated. That's pretty scary. I also feel, and I haven't really investigated this because it's really not my beat. I feel like we're moving into a post-political, not post-political, everything's political in America, but like almost post-governmental world here, because we have Biden, who seems like a vapor at this point. And I mean, I don't even know, it's like, even, where is Kamala Harris? It just feels so sort of vaporous right now. Like, and Congress doesn't do anything. It just doesn't, like, there are so few people that I have like any regard for. I mean, Justin Amash was one, and Peter Meyer is now, and he's probably not going to stay, because why would you? Anyway.
Can I ask one tiny PS question.
look
About
at
my
me.
hair? So
Well, your hair looks fantastic.
Thank
For the
you.
viewers, for the listeners who can't see it, it is pink and
Oh my
great.
god! I totally neglected my duties as designate.
yeah, I put a tweet up with
Cinematographer.
There is a
see the
tweet.
hair.
You can
Yeah.
see it. No, I was very jealous at the very beginning when you were talking about your origins of reporting and just kind of like going out, doing the thing, talking to the people, talking to the whoever. Because I feel like my journey to journalism had very little of that comparatively. And so I'm just curious if you have any like stories that have stuck with you in the spirit of telling a story that you've probably told before.
Oh my God.
Are there any like characters you met and along the way in reporting?
No. What's the story of your formative journalistic years that you haven't told, that you feel that is an important piece that never comes up?
It's not, I wouldn't say it's formative. I've had so many interesting stories. I will say the one thing that I know about journalism is that you can never, ever pre-decide the story. First of all, this is totally illegitimate because then you're steering your story where you want it to go because that's the information you're looking for. But also people will surprise you. Oh my God, will they surprise you? I can give one example. A story I wrote for the LA Weekly. There was a little tiny clip in the LA Times about this woman who was run over on the beach. She lost an eye. Her boyfriend at the time, it was like his legs were crushed. And
Run over by a car?
they were sleeping on the beach, run over by a Jeep. They were kind of homeless. But apparently, like, she was kind of known in the community. This was in Venice. And my editor at the Weekly just had like a nose for news. And she's like, I don't know. I think there's something here. Why don't you look into it? So I go and I find the woman. Her name is Nancy Safanov. She's in like a public rehabilitation with her eye out. And she got this cackle and a few teeth. And it turns out she was an heiress. Kind of an heiress. Her family had started like American Standard. Her father had been the president of American Standard, which makes toilets. All the toilets that you see, American Standard. She'd grown up and she'd married this guy at MIT. Anyway, and then her boyfriend was this guy. He had grown up like, he was a black dude. She was white. He was black. He'd grown up like super rough in LA and he was addicted to crack and she was an alcoholic. And I was like, oh, I know what this story is. It's white, black, booze, crack, right? How much cleaner could I get? Then I met her husband, they'd met when she was younger and he was at MIT. And he was now at USC and he was a professor. And I sat with him in his office and he had never in his life talked about what had happened with her when she became an alcoholic and they had a young son. And it was like I lanced a boil that had been there for 20 years. And he was a very sort of kind of like quiet professorial guy. He did not stop talking for an hour and 45 minutes. I just sat there. And I was taping it. And I got back to my car and I was actually shaking. And I said to my editor, I called her, I said, what I thought is not the story. The story is who she took with her. And then I met her son. I'm getting goosebumps telling you this story. I never could have predicted this. And the only reason I got it is because I looked. I'm actually very pleased with that story. It's called Who She Took With Her. It's on my website, nancyrom.com. I had something else happen recently. I wrote my book and I was contacted by a child that the woman who had committed the murder had adopted out when the child was a newborn. And she was contacting me in order to find out about her half siblings and the mother who, had she been around and living with her, might also have been thrown off the bridge. So these are things that if you pay attention and you're open to people telling you really sometimes the hardest things in their lives, I mean, for me, this is just such an honor and a privilege. And it can be hard. But like when I find these stories, I'm like, I don't want to do anything else except build palomamedia.com. Which is coming within the month. So everybody should be on the lookout for that.
Thank you, Nancy.
Oh, guys, thanks for having me over.
Thank you for listening to Uncertain Things. Follow us on uncertain.substack.com or wherever you get your podcasts. We are Uncertain Pod on the social media. And if you're feeling generous, please give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Please share us with your friends and enemies. And until next time, stay sane. When we started talking about Portland, you had you gave a sigh and a repeated disclaimer of, here's the thing that it's the thing that I've said a million times before, which I relate to because I always feel a bit of guilt whenever I ask a question that I feel I kind of need to bring in my refrain on that topic. There's just something that I feel is true in so many, podcasts like ours or the media industry. There's so much content and we end up repeating ourselves a lot. How much do you hate that? When
the media repeats itself or when I repeat myself?
Both. You as part of the media.
Like, for instance, the story I told about Jake and Matt, I've told it like 7 times, but it's true. It's like how I launched it. And these are, I think.
It's funny. I always say 17 as my generic number.
I mean, I because that's how, people are interested in Portland and how did you get there? And I'm using these 2 people who are very smart and they're news people. So I use it and I try to do the accent. Yeah, I mean, sometimes I do. I mean, I try to, I probably to a fault, I'll say, I've said this before, because I don't want someone to say, hey, I heard her say that before someplace else.
I don't have this compunction at all. I don't feel bad about this at all. I have no problem repeating my story, because I know it's a good story. I've perfected it. I've got the beats. Okay. I know where to end.
All right. Okay.
Like, I know people are going to like it. It's like, when people like look at you and make you feel good, it's like if I hit the beats right on this story, people are going to like it.
Yeah. Back when I was in Israel and was performing as a musician, I would be like, I would have my banter stories. And I know that some professional musicians have the same exact fucking banter story that they really like stand-up comedians. It's perfected to the pause. They know exactly when to pause. And I couldn't. I remember specifically it was one of our biggest shows. It was packed and Chen was taking off his shirt because he was so excited.
All those people.
Talk about youth.
Exactly. Talk about youth. And I had a story and everybody was just laughing. And I had them and I knew exactly how to recreate it. And next show, I just couldn't say the same. But it worked then. So why should, that I did it. They'll hold me accountable and then they'll come for me with like pitchforks for telling them the same story that they've already heard. So I obviously gave up on that. Bothers me. So I related to your disclaimers is what I'm saying.